Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Steve Hardwick, and I'm the volunteer co-chair for Region 4 of Columbus City Schools. My role is to help facilitate the conversation tonight and take you through the agenda. Please keep your cameras on if you can for the entirety of the meeting, but please keep your microphones on mute until we get to the discussion in the breakout rooms. Please use the chat function if you have a question, and we'll have our regional volunteers assist in making sure you are heard. We'll acknowledge when we don't have an answer that you may be asking in the chat. I'd like to ask everyone to please help us exercise a little bit of grace. Everyone will have the opportunity to voice their opinion, so please help us remain positive, because we know this year has been stressful, and sometimes the conversations about facilities and planning of the future can be stressful, but we're going to remain positive and constructive. We will acknowledge when we don't have answers right now, and all the questions in the chat will be documented by our student lead, Safi Minyoki, and answered by district staff at a later time and compiled into an FAQ document. We will also have Area Superintendent Dr. Keith Harris and Board Member Dr. Tina Pierce with us this evening. Additionally, we have Mike Nicholson from Battelle for Kids and representation from Legat Architects, who is the planning consultant to assist in the process. And right now, I'm pleased to introduce Area Superintendent Dr. Keith Harris.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I want to thank all of you for taking the time out tonight to participate in the June Region 4 Facilities Master Plan meeting. For those of you who may be attending for the first time, you should know that Region 4 is composed of 19 schools in one program, with most of the Region 4 schools being located in the northwest area of the city. I appreciate you being a part of the FMP process by giving us your feedback for this comprehensive study of our school facilities in Columbus City Schools and how we can go about making them better facilities to support the district's educational vision, also known as the CCS Portrait of a Graduate. Tonight, we will be talking about 3 of those attributes found from the CCS Portrait of a Graduate: creativity, critical thinking, and technology, and how these attributes can be translated into physical space and facilities. So again, I say thank you, thank you, thank you. Your participation and input is greatly appreciated and important to us. At this time, I have the pleasure of introducing board member Dr. Tina Pierce, who will come and give you some opening remarks. Dr. Pierce.
Good evening, everyone. I want to thank those individuals who are joining us for the first time. Thank you for coming to our conversation this evening, again, to think about the spaces that we need for our students to be innovative, critical thinkers. To those individuals that are joining us for the first time, please don't let this be the last time that you join this very key conversation about how to design spaces in which all of our students are able to thrive, both in the classroom and outside of the classroom. During tonight's conversation, I want to challenge us all to think about the entire student. Think about what our students need academically in the classroom, but also think about the spaces that they need to socialize with one another, to engage with the educators in the building, with additional staff members that are in the building, to be able to go into spaces and have physical activity. So think about our facilities as well. And think about those spaces that maybe we have yet to see in Columbus City Schools, those spaces that maybe you've seen in an office complex or in another surrounding or neighborhood school. Think about creatively, innovatively, how we can introduce those spaces into our Columbus City Schools. And while we're talking this evening about Region 4, we know that in our district, all students come first. And so when we bring our ideas to the table, not only do we want to see it executed in Region 4, we want to see it executed throughout the district. So please also make sure that we're thinking beyond just the students in Region 4, but we're thinking about all of our Columbus City School students, because at the end of the day, With the level of choice that we have, the great programs that we have throughout our district, our students may go into any building. And we want to make sure that those buildings, again, are inviting places where creativity and innovation thrive. So thank you all for joining us tonight. We appreciate it.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dennis Pavin. I am an architect with Leggett Architects. So again, for those of you who have been joining us in the past, thank you for coming again. It's nice to see you. For those of you who are joining for the first time, welcome. So we truly appreciate your attention this evening. There will be two other folks on our team represented tonight, Robin Randall and Melva Williams-Argyle. The other folks that you'll be seeing later on in the process continues as we move forward, and that's specifically towards Ferris Planning and Design and AEC. We wanted to remind you that we want all voices heard. So whether you could attend or cannot attend, there are all of the previous documentation and meeting minutes and surveys as we've moved forward from the process starting this past March. So if you have an opportunity, this is a live QR code. You can hold your device up, or if you can see the website down below, but please take the opportunity, if you have one, to check out the website for all the documentation that has been submitted so far. We wanted to take a minute to synopsize what is the facility master plan? What are we doing? What are the goals? Number one is to reflect the vision of a Porch of a Graduate. This was something that would typically, we develop a mission or a vision, and this one, and for this particular district, we've gotten it. And so this is the measuring stick of which we will judge how the conceptual master plan is a success or not, and how it meets the 6 pillars of a Porch of a Graduate. We will also support academic programs for all grades. Our goal is that this is a district-wide facility master plan. Align utilization enrollment for all regions. We understand that this is, and tonight, and this is proving to it, that we are using a regional approach to how we will be executing this master plan. And our goal is to create not only facilities that meet the pillars of a Porch of a Graduate, but to be as effective and efficient as possible. The other main component is gaining consensus. We understand that we're not just driving this process forward because we think we have a plan. The idea is to collectively discuss the ideas, review the data, and then we gain consensus on a plan moving forward. The implementation of the projects within the plan, because of the size, scale, and scope of Columbus City Schools, this will be a 10 to 12 year implementation plan. So the idea of that we're just going to pass, something's going to be out there and it's going to be complete and it's going to be this number of buildings, that's nearly impossible. I don't like using that word very much, but in this particular case, it's appropriate that there has to be a prioritization of what buildings will be attached or approached, at a certain time. And the design of the school buildings and all of the selections within those buildings, that is after the plan is approved. That is not what we are here to do. In conclusion, what we will be doing is creating a report. The master plan is a report. And what this is a living document that brings together all of the data and all of the participation amongst all of these and how they relate back to a Porch of a Graduate. It's not just a static piece of paper that we're going to be just putting on a desk. This is something that will be a living document as this plan moves forward. An example of a master plan, this is something that Robin and I worked on a few years ago for Shaker Heights schools. Obviously the scale is much different, but the approach of what the plan was still the same. It was a district-wide look at their existing facilities and what we are taking with our curriculum, where we want the curriculum to go, and how we want to implement that within these existing buildings. So this is one of the concepts that came up of building a new middle school, renovating the elementary schools, updating the high school, but all the current grade banding that they had established will remain the same. And then you see on the upper right, the green, yellow, red. This was presented at a forum in their high school cafeteria, and the attendees had a chance to vote. So green was something that they liked the plan, yellow was a little hesitant, but they might have liked one of the other concepts, and red was something that they just didn't approve of. But this is the idea, this is the consensus building we'll be getting to as we start developing these things later on in the fall. So where are we now? We are at the define phase. The define phase is what we envision, or after envision, and it's the programmatic phase. How are these spaces arranged? Where are they arranged? How big are they? How small are they? And we are using the pillars of a portrait of a graduate for us to get there. The next step, we'll be reporting out. We have several upcoming meetings with curriculum and academics and planning. We have a lot of other conversations to be had. And then we will have an opportunity to meet with you again to report all of our findings. And then later on in the fall, that's when we'll start putting what we like to call pen to paper. This one will actually be creating the concepts of what we want this plan to be after all of this data has had a chance to absorb. So just a quick recap of where we were. The gather phase, we started off asking some basic questions so we can just get to the essence of what is working and not working within Columbus City Schools. So we asked, what aspects of your schools do you feel are successful? And there was quite lively conversation, and we have a lot of notes to that. What the points that you're seeing here on the screen about the availability and the communication and the pride of the district, this is a summary. All of the regions have their full summaries on the website. So if you are curious to see what all the other responses were for this question, please head to the FMP website. And again, on the opposite side of that, we know you can't have all the positive without some of the negatives. So we wanted to ask, what do we feel are some of the barriers? And so again, this was asked at all the regional discussions, and we had a lot of very important feedback throughout the region. Some of it was consistent, some of it was very region specific. Again, if you are interested, please go to the website for the full report. Step two, we had a chance to now reflect on what we saw as the challenges, what we saw was working, and how we can start seeing space and seeing our facilities and how they can address both the positives and the negatives. And to do that, we used 3 pillars of a portrait of a graduate. This is when the administration and the board had an opportunity to introduce this as adapted within the district. And then we wanted to use, because this is the vision of the district, top to bottom, this is what we're using as the vision to create the facilities. But due to the time constraints of our regional meetings, we wanted to take these in smaller parts and address them in 3 pillars at a time. For the envision phase, we addressed adaptability, communication, and global empathy. A summary of one of the discussion questions of how, when we think of adaptability, we talked about agility and how can things be moved, and flexibility was something that really came up. But this is a summary of one of the regions and how they were addressing the first discussion question that we had at our last community discussion. And again, this is the summary, and all of these are listed on the FMP website. Communication, what types of flexible furniture? We talked about how students communicate. What can we do within a facility to provide the utmost beneficial communication for different types of learners and different types of people? So we had conversations addressing from how you walk past someone in a classroom to what that classroom looks like and the equipment that's within. And then finally, discussion 3, we talked about global empathy, and we mentioned about the idea of being welcoming and a community space, and how we can show environmental stewardship to reflect how a facility, or how a building, it's more important, how a building is showing itself to be a steward of the environment. And the idea of connection of outdoor spaces, community spaces, garden spaces, and multiple outdoor multifunctional use. So again, the summaries of these discussion questions are all on the FMP website. And now today, we are moving into step 3, our define phase, and we're taking the next 3 pillars of a portrait of a graduate. With that, I hand it over to Robin.
Thank you so much, Dennis. And I really think it's important that you know how this master plan is really driven by you. It's authored by you. We're purely facilitators. So thank you for sharing your voice with us tonight. The 3 pillars that we're diving into today are creativity, critical thinking, and technology. And we've invited the chair author of Battelle for Kids for the Portrait of a Graduate to introduce these ideas and share some of the science and the data behind their ideas as it translates to facilities. So take it away, Mike.
Thanks, Robin. Yeah, the first one we have here is creativity. And a couple things to know possibly and how it's defined, how Columbus has defined it as part of its Portrait of a Graduate. Our students will be imaginative and explore original ideas and innovative solutions by transcending traditional thought patterns and relationships. And you might notice there's a certain theme that runs through that description, is that that notion of novelty, that notion of newness, of fresh ideas, fresh thinking, original, innovative, and transcending traditional thought. And so there's a inclination here, or a hint that we probably need expansive thinking. We need to be able to think on the periphery. We need to be able to think all around. And I think expansive is the word. And when Robin said, "What does the science suggest about this when we're thinking in terms of spaces?" If you go to the next slide, please. There's a pretty good link between empirical research that shows that those folks who are in surroundings that tend to have broader vistas and more wide open spaces, things that really don't have close barriers nearby, tend to be able to think more broadly. And that certainly would be in the service of creative thinking. So things like, again, views and vistas, ceiling height, brighter wall colors that give more of an openness than closed in. All those things can contribute to creative thinking, innovative thought. And so that might be something we keep in mind as we think about how can our facility support creative thinking. Robin, back to you.
Thank you, Mike. So when we think about creativity in a school, often assume that that's happening in an art room, such as this, or in the music room, or the space that houses the arts. And what we want to talk about tonight is, while these spaces are creative and led by teachers that are informing about creativity, they're not the only place for creativity in our schools. What the pillar really is talking about is creative thinking and problem solving and putting the puzzle together in a new way. How do we connect things? How do we flip them on their heads and turn them upside down and put them together in a new way that says something unique about the person that's creating or the team that's creating together, and balancing those things back and forth? So what could that space look like? Well, let's blow away the walls of the art room and think about it and unleash creativity in a new way. This is not a school, but it could be. And having that unbounded thought process, like Mike shared in terms of the science, is important. It allows our brains to think differently and be open to new ideas and expansive thinking. So we're going to have some fun tonight. Instead of waiting for the discussion to be at the end of the conversation, we're going to have it in 3 separate parts, in smaller bites this time. So we're going to ask you a question about creativity, and then we're going to go into a breakout session that's going to be about 10 minutes long. So the question is, thinking beyond classrooms, what types of settings inspire you to think creatively? I'll hand it over to the co-chair.
Thank you. The purpose of this community discussion is to review the final three pillars of the portrait of a graduate. So we said creativity, critical thinking, and technology. In this breakout session, we will be specifically looking at the pillar of creativity. Now, think about what the presentation we have just heard and how we can support this pillar with space in our school facilities. How will these spaces work? What type of spaces would encourage our students to be imaginative and explore original ideas and innovative solutions by transcending traditional thoughts, patterns, and relationships? The specific question that you will be answering is, thinking beyond classrooms, what type of settings inspired you to think creatively? Now, with that, our Zoom moderator will organize us into breakout rooms for more intimate conversation. When you've received the Zoom link, you were given a breakout room assignment, but I think she's been reassigning people. Each group will have a champion, reporter, and a scribe. After 10 minutes, we will come back together and report to the group at large. If you are selected as the scribe, please ensure that you fill out the Google form and please submit your responses to each individual question after every breakout room. You will always go to the same breakout room tonight. With that, you can now go to your breakout rooms. We all, people going to be popping back in here? 45 second. Here comes everyone. Okay, I think everyone is back. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the groups and have 1 to 2 minutes for everyone to report what happened in their groups. I'll just start with group 1. There's someone from group 1 who wants to speak for the group.
I took notes so I can speak. So we first talked about thinking creatively can be promoted by kind of being in nature and being in comfortable, bright spaces. But we spent a lot more time talking about the need for dedicated spaces for dedicated activities. For example, we need, for example, for art or drama or robotics, kind of an organic space to spread out and organize and see what we're doing. And to not have to kind of clean it up immediately when we're going to be doing the same thing the next day. That wastes a lot of time. We talked about different kinds of seating and kind of learning environments. So maybe little quiet nooks for some, desks for others, like soft seats, just different types of seating arrangements. And that's kind of the summary. I have more detail, but I don't want us to take up too much time.
Thank you. Group 2. Is there someone from group 2 can talk?
I can talk.
Go ahead.
Since I took the notes, we talked also about outdoor space and or the view of outdoor space. So lots of open, lots of lighting, large windows, etc. But then also the idea of the space, the outcome inspiring the creativity. So for instance, if it's a gallery or museum or shop, say shop class, that could inspire the creativity as well. So to quote one of the members, the vista is a spot of wonder that engages the creative process.
Okay, thanks. And if you haven't already, if everyone could put the information into Google Forms, our family ambassador is going to be looking through those to see if there are any more, any common themes that she should highlight. So we're going to move on to group 3. And one of you wants to talk.
Georgia, do you want to talk or do you want me to talk? All right, I'll go since she didn't pipe up. I wrote some things down. We also talked about the natural settings and bringing the outside in and vice versa. We talked about there being dedicated spaces for quiet and for collaboration. So quiet, cozy. Flexible seating and movement was a big conversation. The freedom of movement can encourage a more open mind and creativity was what someone said. The other big point, I think, was access to technology and the tools at their fingertips to share ideas and work together.
Thank you. And anything else? Okay. Okay, on to group 4 then.
Hi.
Hi.
We had, I think, 3 big things. First was outdoor space. Someone mentioned Columbus Academy has this versatile outdoor space that's like semi-protected, so it can be used in the heat and the snow, and so there's some weather protection. And that's what the other group was saying, have it be versatile with access to things like Wi-Fi, being able to have the space be used for maybe performances or, beyond just gardens and science classes. And then a big thing we talked about was beauty. So like not all places are going to have these natural vistas in a city. So having, you know, like the building be beautiful, have the windows be clean and light to come in. And, you know, art in the buildings, having a clear idea of like, how do you get into this building? So you're not frustrated when you're thinking about, you know, just accessing the building. And then also using, you know, the nature that is around us. So we were mentioning Whetstone Park because that's in our section, and the river, and having, you know, wherever we are, using the nature that is there. Okay, that's all.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Group 5.
The parent I spoke to was concerned about the glass walls being too much of a distraction of having too much things going outside. She thinks that the rooms should be a little bit more focused based on material. So if it's a science room, have science stuff. If it's math room, have math stuff. She also talked about quiet space, so they have time to think. As a group discussions might be a little bit overwhelming and distracting, but they should be able to come together and talk and bounce ideas off of each other. But having that individual space where they can have time, quiet time to think, that will be helpful. That's about it.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Chris Ezzo, our family ambassador, have you seen any interesting ideas in the Google Forms?
I think everyone did a wonderful job reporting out. All the ideas that we talked about came up in the Google form.
Okay, well, thank you. Now we'll move on to the next step, Battelle for Kids again.
There we go. I think there we go. So the next competency, the next pillar would be critical thinking. And just for a common grounding, the way that, there we go. Oh, okay. So for common grounding, the way it's defined here, our students will analyze and apply evidence-based reasoning to understand the big picture challenges and how solutions affect other parts of the system. So you have this connecting ideas, seeing how part to whole, whole to part, analyzing. It's pretty rigorous thinking. And if you go to the next slide, please. This rigorous thinking often implies risk-taking because oftentimes to accomplish this type of cognition, you need to challenge prior learning, challenge tacit assumptions, consider opposing views or contrary views, and stretching capacities to learning new skills and information. How do the physical spaces provide support and the cognitive safety for students and educators for this risk-taking? With that also, you can see as implied, critical thinking requires maximum cognitive thought. So it's a big cognitive demand. And so how do our physical spaces help support this cognitive demand? Knowing that different individuals likely have different ways they like to have the conditions so that they can think rigorously. Some people like to be with others and draw the energy off of others to do this thinking. Others like to be in quiet spaces. So how do our physical environment support the variety of ways that people might have for condition? And that variety might reside right in the individual. Sometimes they might want quiet space. Other times they might want more open space with others. So that variation might not just be across people. It might be within the very individual across time. I don't know how many of you might have seen Daniel Pink's work. I think it's one of his more recent books called Now, The Science of Timing, and talks about how this cognitive demand, this critical thinking and creative thinking too, because that takes quite a cognitive load, that we need to set aside particular space and time for that type of work. So he recognized it in his book as well. So let me throw it back over to, is it Robin who's going to pick it up now?
Yep, thanks. Appreciate it, Mike. Thanks for sharing the science behind the critical thinking. So traditionally, when we design space space for critical thinking, people think about it as it needs to be a lab space. Hands-on learning is part of critical thinking, and obviously small group is important, but it's really about interconnectivity and that systems thinking. So if we look at how our brain might function in the next slide, where we are connecting things in a different way, we may take two dissimilar pieces of information and connect them in a new way. And that's what critical thinking is. And we have to be open to that spontaneous learning. So when we're in a group space, that we're sharing that information and we're making ourselves vulnerable to input from others and being willing to accept critique and change and modify with that critique. So if we look at a space that's not in a school, but actually think about it as a space that's in an office, this is where we're preparing our students to go to a place where they can be collaborative and share their critical thinking with others. There's still opportunity to operate as a solo person and have those quiet moments, but there's also opportunity to balance those ideas off of each other in a comfortable setting, in a place where we could run into somebody that we might not normally speak to. If we're working in an engineering space and all of a sudden we're talking to a business person, right? How do we create and innovate in that thinking? And can we push this imagery down into the preschool all the way through the 12th grade so that business people can come in and help with that critical thinking? Imagine. So our question that we'll use for our breakout is, part of critical thinking is to challenge previous assumptions and connect unlike ideas. What are the characteristics of spaces needed to support that critical thinking? Hand it off to the co-chair.
Thank you. And what we'd like to do now is to think about the presentation we've just heard and how we can support the pillar of critical thinking in our school facilities. How would these spaces work? What type of spaces would encourage our students to analyze and apply evidence-based reasoning to understand the big picture challenges and how solutions affect other parts of the system? Specific question you will be answering is, what are the characteristics of spaces needed to support critical thinking? And what are the characteristics of spaces needed to support critical thinking? And with that, our Zoom moderator will organize us back into breakout room, open up the breakout rooms. Please go back to the same breakout room that you were in before. After 10 minutes, we'll come back together and report just the way we did before. Same as before, please use the same scribe that was selected earlier. If you are the scribe, once again, please ensure that the Google form gets filled out and the response is submitted. With that, you can now go into your breakout rooms. Okay, I think everyone should have a chance to be back now. Let's go in reverse order as we did last time. Start with group 5.
Okay, so my parents spoke about the office space concept being a good idea, making sure it's flexible for small or large groups, making also the environment welcoming to students so they're able to express their ideas when they have them, being able to use boards as a way to jot down ideas so that others can piggyback on them or they can all create new ones. And a lot, again, having quiet areas to allow for thinking.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay.
Is that, did I cut you off?
No, that was it.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Group 4.
All right. We had having a place for to do writing. So like people who might be reluctant to speak up in class. So like maybe rolling boards or lots of chalkboards or dry erase boards. Also based on problem-based learning, having shared spaces that maybe can be used for multiple day projects that maybe isn't like your traditional classroom, but maybe a larger space so that things can kind of stay out more than a day or a half day. And in addition to that, having flexible storage and seating to allow kind of like different than a traditional like classroom day. Another thing was having speaker systems in all of the public spaces. So that way, whenever there's a presentation, there's an opportunity for people's voices to be projected. And then also in a more bricks and mortar way, sound dampening. So that way, whatever's going on in the next classroom isn't disrupting what's going on in the classroom that you're in. That's all.
Oh, thank you very much. Now,
I'd like to add one point, Stephen.
Absolutely.
There's one phrase that was in their group that I thought was really great, and it was facilitate participation, because a lot of this stuff has to do with group work, and there are a lot of different learners out there that some are active, some are in it, but just the idea of these types of spaces should facilitate participation from all different types. I just thought those two words together were quite useful. So I just wanted to share that with the group. Thank you.
Thank you. On to group 3.
I guess I'm up. Georgia, again, feel free to write something in the comments or pop in if I don't cover everything. We talked that we have several teachers in our breakout room. And so they talked about this current year and how everyone's using one-on-one devices and now coming back into classrooms, making sure things are flexible. So that sort of steered the conversation into the flexible office space and workspace is great. However, they need a construct classroom for focus and sustainability as well. Somebody mentioned, sound dampeners to sort of control the chaos, if you will, but also to have that additional space to use as flexibility. The student liaison in our group talked about how she appreciated the fresh air and outdoor space that she was able to utilize this year for critical thinking, and she thought that was very important moving forward.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Group 2.
I'll give it a shot for our group, if that's okay. One of the main things that we talked about was quiet pods, or like quiet spaces to go back and reflect without a lot of interaction. And some of the things that we talked about is it's really challenging in classrooms of 29 students to actually have the opportunity to have the chance to think and, think wide and not just directly trying to answer a question. But beyond that, I think we kind of got off a little tangent, but important thoughts regarding like not just about the space, but the environment and the curriculum as well. That's going to be utilized to drive critical thinking. So often the curriculum or the classrooms are challenged with time constraints and things based on the required learning, which makes it difficult to actually take time to think wider on a topic and to think creatively. So, and then beyond that, like encouraging our kids to try and make mistakes and take risks, which I think a lot of corporations are really holding closely, or they really, I think, value. And then sometimes revisiting subjects, or have the ability to revisit subjects to drive that deeper learning. So, so we kind of got a little bit beyond just the question, I guess, about the spaces, but I think the quiet spaces seem to ring clearly in our group.
Thank you very much. On to group one.
Sarah, if you want, I will chime in if you want, since you took notes. So in group one, we talked about having those spaces for collaboration. I mentioned, that my husband's workplace has this, but I also remember having this at when I was at OSU, where we would go to the library and we would have these special, like just rooms that were for, somewhere between 4 and 10 people, depending on the size of the room, where like you could go in for group work and be able to collaborate with other people. And there was whiteboard space, and there was, and I even thought about having actual, like the same type of, smart board type technology we have in the classrooms there, so that when kids take notes, they don't just have to erase it and it's gone. They can send it to themselves electronically, and then everybody has it. And, and so you don't lose those ideas when you leave that room. But then we also took a step back and thought bigger picture, because right now, with the number of high schools we have, yes, you have your certain schools that, focus on arts or and stuff like that. But if you had fewer schools that were larger, that you could offer more options in the curriculum. I mean, we have 5 English teachers at Centennial, and they all teach 5 sections of English. There is no poetry. There is no, not as a class. There is no creative writing. There is no Shakespeare. There is no, there is nothing as an elective option in any subject area for the most part, with the exception of the electives categories. And even those are slim for student choices. So if you had a larger school with 2,000, 3,000 students, you would have the opportunity to perhaps offer more options as far as the curriculum was concerned, which would, I think, allow kids to think more creatively, because they have more control over what classes they take that will actually count towards English credits or math credits or science credits. They have that flexibility to be able to make those choices. So we kind of thought that we didn't, maybe in, we're meeting in regions, but like maybe we didn't step back far enough, that maybe we need to think in terms of bigger combinations of schools and having fewer high schools, so that you have the option to be able to provide curriculum options for students to be able to think critically.
Thank
So
you
I'm just
go ahead.
quickly want to just from our group add to that, just as an example. We perennially have a waiting list for people to get into cause, many of whom want the IB program there. If we had 4 or 5 large high schools, every one of them could have a sustainable sized IB program. And then every high school student in the district would have that option available to them if they wanted it. And we wouldn't have this issue where there's all these people trying to get into cause for that particular program. And that goes on at Fort Hayes and arts programs. It's not just IB and cause. It goes on with a lot of our programming.
Services, English language learning services, that are only offered at certain schools, but kids want that arts program. So they're going to sign a waiver to basically bypass the services that they do need in order for them to be successful, and they'll sign those away because they want that arts program.
Okay, thank you. Carissa, do you have any thoughts based on the forms that you've looked through?
The forms looked great. Someone also said about glass spaces, maybe also in the library, and definitely a couple of people mentioned whiteboards. Making sure to have whiteboards.
Thank you. And before we turn it back over to Mike for some last thoughts on this, does anyone have any questions, thoughts, or comments? Okay, now we go back to Mike then.
So for the third pillar, we have technology. And again, it just is a common grounding. Our students will leverage traditional and emerging technology to consume, create, communicate, and connect while practicing responsible citizenship in an increasingly digital world. And something that's maybe worth noting, and something you've probably already observed, these competencies and the characteristics that they share build on each other. We can see that these are not mutually exclusive competencies. They all share that 21st century higher cognition, more than the historical recall that we've had in schools. Two things to point out that have been fairly well documented about technology in the schools is, if you go to the next slide, please. Perfect, thanks. Technology keeps evolving at an ever accelerating pace. So one challenge for our facilities is how do our facilities remain adaptable to the evolving technology? What technology will be 5 years from now, maybe, notably different than what it is today. So how do our facilities keep up with that? Because that relates to the second, or at least a related notion. If technology continues to evolve at an ever accelerating pace, how do we allow our kids easy access to these tools so that they can leverage them for their own learning? So it's a twofold challenge, at least, that we invite you to think about. How do our facilities stay adaptable to the evolving technology and how it changes? And how do we allow students easy access to this evolving technology? Let me leave it there. Back to you, Robin.
Appreciate it. So what we've got now, right, is a traditional classroom that has technology in it. How is this supporting technology and creating that critical thinking and creativity piece in an environment if we're still just lining up the desks in rows and we're facing the front of the room and we've got a screen and we've got a teacher that's just offering information and not providing a place where technology can really take us leaps and bounds beyond this kind of space. It's been rewarding this year. We know that technology has made learning possible. So one-to-one is in existence. So as we come back to our classrooms and our schools in the fall, what could they look like to support technology better? So, native learners, right? Even infants know how to operate technology now. They're using their mom's phones or their dad's phones in the grocery to keep themselves occupied. So these native users of technology need a space where they can both use it, but also be guided, because there are risks with technology to get to places where we don't really need the students to be, right? We need some kind of guidance on how to use technology. And then the leader is also the follower, and the follower is the leader, right? The students can lead through this process. And this is what the future of learning looks like. And it's now. This is what Google is right now. So these are the kind of spaces that could be happening in our schools, in our career tech spaces. We need our students to be ready for this now. And they're ready. We just don't have the space for them to do. So imagine an environment that supports technology and the use of technology in that infinite way that it's possible. And you can see how flexible the space is. So any new technology that comes can be integrated, and there's space for that, and there's room for the future. So our last question tonight, thank you for sticking with us, is given the fast pace of technological change, how can we plan spaces to accommodate this fast-paced change? So please, I'll hand it off to the co-chair.
Okay. Again, think about how the presentation we've just heard and how we can support the pillar of technology in our school facilities. How would these spaces work? What kind of spaces would encourage our students to leverage traditional and emerging technology to consume, create, communicate, and connect while practicing responsible citizenship in an increasingly digital world? And just because we want to make sure the question is clear, it is, given the fast pace of technological change, how can we plan spaces to accommodate this fast-paced change? And with that, please go back to your same Zoom breakout rooms. After 10 minutes, we'll come back together and report to the group at large. Please use the same scribe that you used earlier. And if you are that scribe, once again, please make sure you fill out that Google form and submit your responses. With that, please go to your breakout rooms. think everyone knows the format now, so I'm going to start in the middle this time and go up from from group 3.
Brian, do you want to speak to it, or do you want me to step up?
I'd be happy to speak at least partially here. So we talked about the need for comprehensive future proofing, specific things like instead of hardwiring a particular cable, such as a Cat6 that might be outdated in a few years, instead of putting that in and then zip tying it to a column in the building every 6 feet, put a channel in, a pipe that you can run any cable through. And that way, if it's Cat6 this year, great. If it's fiber next year, okay. If it's Cat10 in 4 years, whatever cables you want. When it comes to wall plates and media, hookups in a classroom or in a hallway, have changeable plates so that if you do need to swap out cables, you can have a plate, have access points for technicians. We talked about, and particularly our student representative talked about the need for bigger desks to hold both a notebook and a computer or a device. I find that really difficult in my own classroom that is a computer lab. There's plenty of space for them to use the computer or a notebook, not both. And then we also, I mentioned at the end, presentation software or not presentation hardware for both the classroom. The teacher station should never be overlooked in this because it's like a really important part of the puzzle. And also generating school culture through the use of a school-wide presentation system. And intercom doesn't really cut it for generating the culture of a school. And then there were others, more specific concerns, very practical nuts and bolts things that get overlooked, like mounting a smart board too low in the classroom because there's a pipe that you have to avoid. Stuff like that is, when it gets down to who's actually mounting this stuff in the classroom, they put it where they can, and regardless of the educational outcomes. That's all. Did that make sense, group 3?
Yeah, I think that was a great encapsulation in terms of the infrastructure, et cetera. The other thing that we had said was also making sure that we have the space to juggle between devices, but also Ryan had brought up a really important point early in our conversation, and that was helping our students be producers of media, not just consumers of media. So making sure that the technology tools that we have moving forward, that we're not only educating them about how to be consumers, but on making sure that we're enabling them to be producing their own media themselves.
Thank you.
Can I just add something there? I'm sorry.
Okay.
It reminded me of something that I'm not a big fan of renovating buildings, but if we're going to renovate them, let's not put equipment where it's easy to put it. Let's put it where it needs to be. I mean, my first year in the district 20 years ago at East High School, they had renovated. The smart board was at one end of the room. The media cabinet was at the other end and wasn't facing the front of the room. So even if you opened the cabinet doors, you couldn't stand in the front of the room and use the remote control for the devices that were in there. And I'm sure that's because that's where it was easy to put it in terms of wiring it in an old building. But right, let's be purposeful, even if we're renovating, and spend the time and the money and the resources to put things where they should be, not where it's easy for them to be.
Okay. Thank you. Group 4.
Hey. All right. So we had, along with group 3, our architect helped us with this, allow for integrated design. So the updatability of the infrastructure so that when new things come along, it can be changed. Kind of along with that, don't be attached to a specific technology. So I gave the example of, like, my school had a Laserdisc player that was very expensive, but we all know how Laserdiscs went. So like kind of being thoughtful whenever they do purchase that kind of technology, it's probably going to change. And going back to like practical use also with like board placement, but like outlets, they need to be in like a place that it makes sense for them to be, or the number of outlets in a classroom, or how the classroom is going to be used, whatever that looks like. And then our final point, I guess, was communication from the district. So, like letting the schools know and like the PTAs know like what the plan is and then following through with it. Because I know that there was at least one elementary school near me that spent a bunch of money on like Wi-Fi for their building. And then the next year, everyone got Wi-Fi. And so lots of people spent a lot of time fundraising. And for your individual school, it feels like a lot of money, but like when we're talking about a huge district like Columbus, it's just like wrapped up in like a much larger project. So like trying to make sure that schools or there's good communication between what the district's plans are and allowing the schools themselves, like the PTAs or even the building principals, to know what that is, so that they can respond accordingly with whatever their purchases are, and they're not working at odds with one another. That is all.
Thank you. Group 5.
Okay, so everyone understands that technology is necessary, but what happens when the light goes out? There's times during the pandemic that the electricity went out, and because of that, there were no classes for the day. That being said, making sure that Wi-Fi is accessible and there's a way to have these buildings equipped so that there's no crashes school-wide will be something to think about. And her concern would be that she would not want the children to get away from learning the basics of using a pen and paper to the point that they don't know how to write. A lot of these kids, they text so much that that's the language that they're learning. They're cutting letters off of these words and they don't know how to spell. So although she appreciates the fact that technology is advancing and necessary, and it's coming away from back in the day where there was actual penmanship class. That was her opinion.
Okay, thank you. On to group 1.
So group 1 talked about the fact that we should have the ease of flexibility when it comes to updating, rather than waiting 20 years to then have one of these facility master plans and let's update all of the technology at once. Let's update it as we go. As the new technology comes out, let's start the replacement process of actually updating the technology in the buildings. I like what the group talked about making sure there was enough electrical outlets. I had to have 6 different extension cords with power strips for kids to charge stuff this year, so that it could reach into the middle of the room. So having plates of electricity in the floor so that kids have that quick access right there at their feet and they don't have to have cords running all through the room. I know that my students hate the small desks because they like to be able to actually have a computer and their paper and their pen. It encourages that, as the parent was concerned about, missing out on the writing piece because we're so focused on the technology, like it encourages them to be taking notes along with their technology so that if they give them the space to do that. One of the other things that I have with technology is the district, when we talk about digital citizenship and understanding like how kids should use computers, the district is a terrible model when it comes to cyber security. Every kid knows every kid's username and password because it's their student ID number and their birth date, which means if you know, or your friend or whatever, and we had all kinds of issues with this year, rampant cheating throughout, where kids were logging into other kids' accounts to get the answers to the document because they were A group or they were B group and the other kids already did it. There should be 2-factor authentication for kids to log into stuff. That means they should have the ability, I teach this about financial security and protecting your identity. And now, but then every kid in the district, could potentially know every other kid's username and password. That's terrible. We're a terrible model when it comes to that, and we need to fix that. And that needs to be district-wide. And I understand it may need to be tiered, Younger kids may need to have a slightly different model than high school kids, but we need to teach them that, you know, if you want your account to be secure, your password shouldn't be easy, right? It shouldn't be easy if it's really truly going to be secure, and a two-factor authentication would be much more beneficial. So the district definitely needs to think into that. Group 1, did I miss anything?
Okay, on to group 2. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I'll see if I can try to cover some of what group 2 talked about, and then if anyone else wants to chime in, that'd be great. So we talked about evolving technology, and then it's nearly impossible for students to maintain hardware technology on their own. So the spaces that we're talking about should provide the ability to check out hardware for students. That way they can keep up with the latest needs for, you know, their assignments and their learning requirements, and to just develop themselves further. So they kind of like likened it to like a library, except for technology. So, and not just laptops, but whatever other things that are out there. And then beyond that, committing to ongoing renewal cycles to keep technology which kids have access to. So it was great that the district, I think, beat the goal of getting the Chromebooks in I think all students' hands, and I think by 2 years. But now what are we going to do, and when are we going to do it to make sure that these Chromebooks don't age themselves out to the point where the kids can't use them, or it's taking 3 times as long to complete assignments and things like that. Or you can't use certain features or certain technology because it's too old for it. Smart bars, where maybe students can go get educated and trained on new technologies. You know, because there's lots of great new technologies out there, but if there's no one there to be able to teach these kids about how to use it and how to, you know, I think someone mentioned not just consume it, but also create from all these advances, then we're kind of doing a disservice to the kids. Then someone mentioned Miro, virtual whiteboards or jam boards, things like that. That would be beneficial for kids to be able to continue collaborating, writing ideas. And we talked about like software as a service. Instead of us being locked into paying, you know, millions of dollars on hardware once that we're going to be stuck with for a decade, you know, can we get into some sort of agreements where it's kind of like a software as a service where we're paying ongoing, but that comes with it the ability to upgrade as technology changes and as things advance and things improve, that we're able to continually evolve and adapt in our district with it. As far as like hardware goes, like, can we look at modular solutions and things that aren't like so mounted into the building systems that it's nearly impossible to upgrade or replace? So we end up being stuck again for decades with old equipment that basically is collecting dust. And then some thoughts, we're bringing our students to community partners, maybe to access state-of-the-art technology. So not always relying on, say, guest speakers coming to us, but maybe we go to these different places to learn about the new technologies and, you know, go into these businesses and facilities that are actually creating the technology to get hands-on experience from it. So that way, 1, we don't have to bring it in and pay for it, and 2, they're getting exposure of a lot of variety of technology solutions out there. Anything else from group 2?
Okay, then. Thank you very much. Carissa, our family ambassador, is there anything from the Google Forms that you think should be added?
I think all the groups did a fantastic job
Sorry,
reporting
can I
out.
say one thing from group 2?
Okay.
Sorry, I was dealing with my son. Sorry for a second. Is it possible for us to put out RFPs for software and hardware leasing to just solve the constantly updatable needs for students of a variety of circumstances? So that kind of resolves all of that. So we can sort of offload the solutions to people who would be supplying the district with these services, because I think the outright purchase of this equipment is an expense that doesn't necessarily need to be incurred by the district. We should be leasing these things, it seems.
Okay. Thank you. Carissa.
I think the groups did a great job reporting out. I think the one thing was having a schedule of replacement. So like every 2 years, I think one group said, so many Chromebooks get replaced. So we're not replacing everything at the same time. So we have a systematic replacement schedule.
Okay, thanks. Before we turn it over to Mike, does anyone have any brief questions or thoughts or comments? We are running late. We want to make sure if you think it's a question you can ask in the comments or submit later in writing, that'd be fine. But if there's something you want to say now, we'd be happy to hear it.
I just want to say in general on technology, let's be on the cutting edge, not the bleeding edge. And let's not do technology for technology's sake. That last picture we saw in the presentation before the last breakout room, I would be totally shocked to find out that that was a school building and not a science museum. I'm pretty sure that that wasn't a school instructional space. And having taken my kids to numerous science museums like COSI is not a great model. There's a lot of technology there where you push a button and hear a recording or see a video. I've seen much better museums where kids are putting their hands on materials in Indianapolis and Portland and other places. So one, let's not be on the bleeding edge here because you don't want to bleed. And two, let's not just start sticking technology everywhere for the sake of saying we have technology.
Okay. I heard someone else, thank you. I heard someone else wanted to chime in.
Yeah, one of the other things that we mentioned in our group was about with the teacher's desk and make sure that the teachers were also being upgraded as they went through. And then that kind of would also fit in with the smart bars that group 2 had mentioned, with having that information available for the teachers as well, because technology is going so rapidly, and trying to be able to stay consistent so that we can go ahead and add that, with the students and keep up with the students.
Thank you. Did I hear another person trying to chime in? Okay, then. Well, now go ahead.
Real quick one. We should probably be outsourcing our security. Last thing we want to do is get hacked to the point where we're held up for ransomware. And that's a real thing, especially now. Large districts are really vulnerable. There's software out there that sends out emails that are phishing tests that allow someone to click or report something that's phishing. And if they fail, they get kind of educated along the way. But I think a partner would be beneficial in resolving or helping us minimize that risk.
Okay, thank you. Now I think it's now I'll turn it back over to Mike.
Steve, is that me, Mike, or Mike Barnes?
Mike from Battelle for Kids.
That'd be
happy to take over if you need me to, but I'd rather not.
Okay. Next slide, please. So one of the things we just wanted to raise that might be an issue or an opportunity in the summer or coming time period is to be sure that we support the educators who will be using this space. Should we, whatever scale we realize with this innovative learning environments, that we be sure the teachers are supported and using it to its optimal degree. With just having the space by itself may not be enough to bring about the change we want for the student outcomes. So we just wanted folks to be aware and to invite to look for this opportunity down the road as we talk about how do we best support teachers in the innovative learning environments. So we just want to plant that seed tonight.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for your thoughts and ideas. All of this information will be incorporated into the report of how this master plan will come together. The comments from tonight, along with the comments from the community discussions in the other 5 planning regions, will be reviewed at the Facility Planning Committee meeting. This review process will lead to future lead to future questions and upcoming surveys. Please join us on Wednesday, June 30th at 6 p.m. to tune in to watch virtually, as that meeting will be live streamed on the district's Facebook and YouTube page. And just as a reminder, if you'd like to catch up on any of the previous phases or upcoming phases, please visit our FMP website, ccsoh.us/FMP. They got that nice and short. So thank you so much for taking the time to share today. Look for a new survey for the define phase in the upcoming weeks. We all look forward to our next community discussion to report all of the data that has been gathered over these first 3 phases. We feel it's necessary to keep you as informed as possible before we start to create concepts of the master plan later in fall of 2022. Your input is greatly appreciated. Enjoy your summer and see you in September.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
everybody. So long. Bye-bye.
Bye.